Hey everyone, my name is Zach Karabedian. I'm a product architect with the Spot Ocean CD team. Today we're going to take a quick walk through our Ocean CD hands-on workshop. I'm going to walk you through how to deploy our Ocean CD operator into one of your existing clusters. We're going to create a few sample Kubernetes services and then migrate those workloads to Ocean CD. We're also going to take a look at how to integrate Ocean CD with Prometheus and how we can actually tie those Prometheus metrics in to our deployments every step of the way. So a couple quick things before we get started. Make sure to check out all of our workshops at spotcades.com. For this one, we're going to be focusing on Ocean CD, but we also have some workshops to get you hands-on with both Ocean for Apache Spark, and our Elastic Group products. So let's dive right into it. So the purpose of this workshop is to walk you through step by step exactly what we're going to be doing. So just to set some expectations here, what we're going to be going through is going through the prerequisites of creating the Ocean CD operator and deploying that into a cluster, creating some Kubernetes resources, a few Ocean CD entities. We'll actually also use the Ocean CD CLI, and then we'll trigger some rollouts. And you'll notice there's a couple different options for basic and advanced. I'm going to go through the advanced workshop, which the only difference is we're going to integrate some metrics along the way using Prometheus. So let's get into it. So the first thing that we need to do is to install OLM within our Kubernetes cluster. So I already have my kube config set. So I'm going to go ahead and install OLM. And while that's installing, I'm going to move on to the next phase. So this next part is going to help us set up the Ocean CD operator. And you'll notice as you go through the workshop, it's pretty self-explanatory with everything that we need to do. So for this next part, I'm going to jump into the Spot console. And I'm going to make sure I'm selecting Ocean CD from our menu bar here. And I'll go ahead and add a cluster. So I'll call this ZachDev EKS. We already installed OLM in that last step. And I do not have Argo rollouts already installed in this cluster. So now that I've put in this information, I'm going to get a YAML file. And that YAML file is going to contain everything I need to deploy this controller here. So now let me make sure I CD into the correct folder here. So this is in my downloads folder. And I need to do a kubectl apply ZachDev EKS operator. And let's hit apply. You'll notice it's going to create a few different resources and all the permissions that we need to manage Ocean CD. Okay, so now that this is deployed, within the next couple of minutes, we should see a green heartbeat pop up within the Ocean CD console. So now let's jump back to the workshop to see what's next. Okay, so the next part of this workshop is making sure that we configure the Ocean CD CLI. And if I pause here for a quick second, let's talk about the CLI and what it's used for. So if you want to maintain all of your Ocean CD entities within code, the Ocean CD CLI is a great place to do that. So in order to install it, I'm going to use some tool like Homebrew to install Ocean CD and run an Ocean CD configure. But before you can actually configure the CLI, you need to make sure that you generate a token, because that token is going to be used to make sure you have the permissions necessary to integrate with our SaaS layer. So I've already gone ahead and done that, so I'm going to skip this next part. Okay, so now let's create a couple Kubernetes services that we're going to use for this next part of the workshop. So let's break down what exactly we're going to create here. So the first thing is going to be creating a namespace, and this is just a way for me to keep everything organized for what we'll be doing in the workshop. The next part is going to be a Spot deployment. So let's take a step back here as well and talk about what a Spot deployment is. So OceanCD utilizes Kubernetes custom resource definitions to know which deployments we should be managing within your cluster. And if you're wondering how much effort it takes to convert your existing Kubernetes deployment to a Spot deployment, it's 2 lines. So you can take your existing deployment and just change the API version to spot.io and the kind to a Spot deployment. Everything else will remain exactly the same. And we also have resources if you're using tools like the horizontal pod autoscaler. We have a OceanCD version of that as well. So the last 2 things we're going to create is 2 Kubernetes services. And the reason we're going to do that is we're going to be utilizing Canary deployments for this next part of the workshop. So I can actually copy everything here exactly as is. And I'm going to jump into Visual Studio Code, and give this a quick name. And I'm just going to call it Kubernetes end-to-end YAML. And I'm going to paste everything exactly as it is. And let's do a apply. There we go. All right, so now all my Kubernetes services are installed. And let's jump back to the Spot console. And I can see that I have my heartbeat. And let's go into our workloads. So what we can see here is all of the different resources that have been created within OceanCD. And if I filter for just my cluster, because we have another cluster here, I can see my Spot deployments already created, and the 3 pods that were requested are already ready. All right, so let's jump back to our workshop. And I'm going to skip the beginner workshop. As I mentioned, the only thing the beginner workshop doesn't have is using something like Prometheus. So I want to use Prometheus for this next part to highlight some of the benefits there. So I'm going to copy these next commands, and this is just to install Prometheus within my cluster. Okay, it looks like the Prometheus server installation was successful. And the important thing to take note of here is the Prometheus server DNS name. And the reason that this is important is because we're going to actually use this to plug into our verification provider. And the verification provider is how we know how to access your Prometheus server. So this DNS name will tell us how to communicate with Prometheus and ultimately what we'll need as a gateway of communication. So I'm going to take a quick note of that. And these next few steps here, the purpose of that is if you're already using Prometheus, we'll show you how to find your DNS name there. Okay, so now for the next part of the workshop, we're going to start interacting with the OceanCD entities. And the only difference between what we did in the previous step with the Kubernetes resources is this is now going to start interacting with the OceanCD CLI. The only difference is instead of doing a kubectl apply when I create this YAML file, we're going to do an OceanCD apply. And again, that's our way of knowing it's one of our entities that we should be managing. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my Visual Studio. And I'll call this OceanCD entity. I'm going to paste everything exactly as it is. And there are 2 fields here that I'm going to need to change. The cluster ID, I need to make sure that I match what I defined, and I'll double check this name in just a second. And I'll make sure I save it this time. And let's go to our Spot console really quickly. And I'm just going to double check my name, which looks good. All right, so let's jump back to the workshop and see what we need to do. The steps here are going to make sure that we're updating the Prometheus verification provider address. So I will do that as well. And it looks correct, so we don't need to update that. And just to go back a step, this is what I was looking at, and it matches the URL that I have in Visual Studio. Okay, so now let's do OceanCD apply. And despite me saying I checked the cluster ID, it turns out I did not. So I had a small typo there. So let's try that again. Okay, so now all of our SAS entities were created. So let's just take a quick look at what that means in the Spot console. So I'm going to click on my settings tab here, and let's take a quick look at what I've created so far. So if I click on my strategy, let's take a look at what I'm doing. So taking a step back, the strategy is what you'll define to let OceanCD know what to do with your Spot deployments. And the neat thing about OceanCD strategies is this can be reused over and over again across multiple clusters, multiple environments. So you can define once and use it many times, which will save your developers or DevOps team a lot of time. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do a canary deployment. And what it's going to do here is we're going to reference a couple of verification templates, and we're going to show that in just a second. And the first step is going to be shifting only 20% of our traffic to this new version. And then if the verifications and the metrics that we're checking with Prometheus look good, we'll shift more traffic to it. And if the metrics don't appear exactly how they should, we'll actually automatically roll back the deployment. If we take a look at what the rollout spec is, the rollout spec is what says, okay, with this Spot deployment name, I'm going to point to this strategy. These are the Kubernetes services that are related to this rollout spec. And in the event that there's a failure, what should I do with it? So should I abort and roll back? Should I stop it and pause where it is so we can debug? So all of that can be defined in your rollout spec. And then really quickly, the verification provider, this is where you're telling us how to communicate with your Prometheus server. Keep in mind, you can set up multiple clusters here. And last but not least, the verification templates is where we're going to provide the actual queries that we want to check during our rollouts. So this can be anything that you've already defined within Prometheus, and then you'll define success and failure conditions, the intervals. Keep in mind, this is just a quick demo scenario, so not based on something I might be doing in real life. Okay, so now let's go back to our workshop, and let's actually go ahead and trigger our first rollout. So the reason we didn't trigger any rollouts so far is because nothing has changed, right? We've only just deployed our individual Spot deployment, but we haven't made any changes. So let's now go back to our other original file that we've created so far. And let's make a quick change to the image that I'm using here, and I will save it. And I'll do an apply. Okay, so now you'll see that the Spot deployment was changed. And now once I hit apply, I can see the rollout being triggered. And now let's take a quick look at what's going on here. So once that rollout is triggered, we are now in our first phase of our strategy, which is shifting 20% of that traffic to the new version. We're also checking the Prometheus metrics here in this phase. We're also doing that same verification in the background. So the difference between a phase and a background verification is the phase is just focused on one part of your strategy, whereas the background, if something goes wrong at any point during your Spot rollout, then we will follow your failure policy based off of that. We're also going to see everything going on the Kubernetes level. So we can see the Kubernetes events and the logs corresponding there. We can also see the Kubernetes resources that are being created. And you can also track that here. So the traffic is being shifted between those two services, and you can follow along the underlying traffic split there. And then the other thing we can see is the old versus new desired state. So this is where we'll be able to see things like, the version that we changed, what exactly caused this rollout to be triggered. And all of that can be followed along here. So I'll put myself on mute and we'll just watch the rest of this rollout. A couple other quick features I want to point out while we're waiting. With OceanCD, you'll have the ability in both the UI and CLI to promote the rollout to the next phase, fully promote, pause where you're at and debug, or roll back, or even retry if you went back and fixed something. Okay, so congratulations. You finally completed your first Spot deployment. So just to recap really quickly what we've done so far, we've set up a Canary deployment. We've created a Spot deployment, a couple Kubernetes services to split traffic between, and then we made a change in order for OceanCD to detect it and then trigger our first rollout while checking Prometheus every step of the way. All right, so now let's go back to our workshop and see what else we can do. Let's go back to our OceanCD entities and let's make a change. So let's go here and I'm going to copy this strategy. Going to save it and I'm going to apply. And again, this is going to be a OceanCD apply because we're managing the OceanCD resources as opposed to Kubernetes resources. So now that all of our resources are working, let's do another change to our image back in our Kubernetes YAML file. And let's trigger another rollout. Okay, so now I saved and applied. Okay, so now if we jump back to the Spot console, we should see another rollout being started. And immediately when we jump into the rollout details, we'll see something's a little bit different. So because we updated our strategy with a unspecified pause duration in that first phase, it's prompting me to promote the rollout to that next phase or roll it back. So this is a great use case for the scenario of maybe a production environment where you want a senior developer to approve the rollout to go to that next phase before it hits your production customers and production traffic. Okay, so just to wrap things up here, this concludes the OceanCD hands-on workshop. What we do encourage you to do is, take what we've done so far in this workshop and actually input Prometheus queries that are meaningful to you. Change your strategy to include arguments. Include that manual approval process at different phases, and certainly let us know what your feedback is. And the last resource I want to leave you with is our Spot OceanCD releases public GitHub. And within that GitHub, we'll provide you with different templates for easy quick starts. So for example, if you're using the Kubernetes horizontal pod autoscaler, you want to see how that would work with one of your Spot deployments, we'll provide you with a sample YAML to get you started there. Also, if you're not using our OceanCD CLI and you're using the OceanCD API, we'll provide you with some sample JSON-based templates to get you started as well. So again, my name is Zach Karabedian. I'm a product architect with Spot by NetApp, and I appreciate you joining us for our workshop.